and welcome to another episode of the Safety in Numbers podcast. This is episode 5, talking about my classroom rule. I know there are a lot of teachers who have lists of classroom rules on their walls, and I don't have anything against that, but it never worked for me because the kids were always finding ways around those rules, and then I had to overrule them. I have one rule to rule them all. No, wait, not like that. I just have one simple rule that covers everything. My classroom rule is, you can do anything you want, so long as it doesn't cause a problem for anyone else. Now before you start thinking, whoa, she's super genius, that's an amazing rule, I didn't write it. I got it from Love and Logic, and it works great because it literally covers everything that could possibly happen in a classroom, and it helps to teach students how to manage their own behavior. So in the rule, there are a couple of key phrases. One is the cause a problem phrase, and the second one is the anyone else phrase. When I teach this to my students, the first thing we do is we list all of the people who could possibly be affected by their behavior in the classroom. And most of the time, they only think it's the people that are in the room at the time. What they don't realize is that custodians are affected by their behavior because the custodians have to clean up after them. So the custodians are affected by what they do. Their parents are affected by what they do in the classroom. If it's public school, their parents pay taxes for them to be in there and to be taught. If it's private school, their parents have to pay tuition for them to be there. So their parents are affected by what they do inside that classroom. Once we've listed all the people who are affected by their behavior, then we start listing all the things that could cause a problem for the other people that we just listed in the classroom. So obviously the other students could be affected by things like talking, and then I always have the kids listed. And then how would your behavior affect a custodian? And I have them listed. How would your behavior affect your parents? And I have them listed. If they're struggling, of course, I will guide their list a bit. But for the most part, I let them come up with their own ideas, because the more that they come up with it themselves, the more ownership they have and the better the discussion is. Many teachers also have lists of consequences. And I did post my one rule on a bulletin board, and then I posted these consequences, or really steps of things that might happen if they choose to break my rule. And the first one always is the look. Every teacher and every mother knows what the look is. It's also called the evil eye. Once I give them a look, they know what that means. If they continue the behavior, I will ask them to resolve the problem on their own by saying things like, would you please stop doing this? It's causing a problem for this person, or it's causing a problem for myself, or I can't teach because of this. And then if the behavior continues, I say something like, if you choose not to solve the problem, then I have to do something because it's my classroom. I'm the one that's in charge. So I have to do something. So first, I give them 2 chances to resolve the problem on their own. And then I have to do something. What I do depends entirely on the person in the situation. And we discuss that. This goes in with teaching the rule and the people who are affected by their behavior and what behaviors cause a problem. Then I talk about, well, what I do depends on the person and the situation. So person A is always talking and I'm constantly asking them to stop. Person B never talks. Today, they both get caught talking. Well, I'm going to react differently to person A because I've constantly had to talk to them about their talking. I'm going to react differently to person B because they've never had a talking problem in the past. So it depends on the person, and it also depends on the situation. And then I always give the kids an out to say, I don't think this is fair. And I tell them specifically how to do this. If you think that what I choose to do is unfair, whisper to me, I don't think that's fair, and we'll talk. And notice the word whisper, because if they come up to me and they're whining or they're nagging, that's not fair. I always tell them, I'm less likely to listen to you than if you come up and you say, Miss Hanson, I don't think that was fair because blah, 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 blah. And I say, which person am I going to listen to? I'm going to listen to the person who is much more respectful than the person who was whiny. I have a consequence chain whenever I have to do something. So there's the first two things, the look, the evil eye. I tell the student what they're doing is causing a problem and I ask the student to solve it. The chain of things that I do after that, when I have to do something, is different and it depends on the situation. But this is a general list of what I would do. First, I would move the student temporarily. If you don't have a seating chart, you can still temporarily move a student's seat. Then I would speak to the student in the hallway with the goal being to find the root of the problem, the root of the cause of the problem, and then helping the student to solve it. Because sometimes the students don't know how to solve their own problems. And this helps them learn how they can choose differently. I also message the student's parent to get their input, and I always want to have really good communication with my students' parents. And then I also go around and ask their other teachers. I always taught on teams, so I'd talk to my team. I'd be like, hey, Sheila's been having this problem. Are you guys seeing any of that? And then we have discussions around that sort of thing to see if it is a widespread problem that something else might be going on in the child's life. If the problem continues after those four things, then I look at our school policies. So every time I worked in a school, we had a school policy for dealing with students who were talking in class. In the last school that I worked in, we did deductions. And those, after 3 deductions, there was a list of consequences that happened, like there was an 8th hour, which was an after-school detention, or there was a lunch detention, or something like that. And that was a school policy, which means I had to follow it. I did have those first 4 consequences that were mine before I instituted the school policy. So now let's say I've instituted school policies and team policies, and the problem is still existing. They still choose to cause this problem. Well, then I permanently move the student's seat. I also contact parents again when I permanently move their seat. That way the parent is not blindsided by, you've done all these things and you didn't let me know. I've had many parents that can solve a problem just like that when I first contact them. If permanently removing the student doesn't solve the problem, then I remove the student from the classroom. And this is not a permanent removal. I don't have that power to remove a student from my classroom, but temporarily, yes. Because my job as the teacher is to instruct students. And if the child's behavior is interfering with my job, I have to remove that student. Now, how I do it, and I'm going to go into that later on in this video, how I do it can make it work better or make it not work at all. And the last thing that I would do is to have the student and me and the parent, and sometimes an administrator or a counselor or a second teacher, write a plan for that student to return to my classroom. So if they are continually causing problems that disrupt my class, then that student, their privilege of being in my room, they've lost it. So they have to get it back because they're still graded. They still have to pass the class. I've had parents say, well, how is my student going to pass the class if they're never in your classroom? And I say, well, that is a problem. When they're in my class with this behavior, I can't teach like I should and as effectively as I can. When they're not in the room, they're not learning. When they are in the room, nobody's learning. So you have probably heard the word consequence and not punishment, because there's a difference between a consequence and a punishment. I don't want to go over that very clearly here. So first of all, a consequence naturally occurs with all behaviors, good or bad. If I am somebody who behaves trustworthy towards all my friends and my family, then the consequence is that people trust me. If I behave in an untrustworthy manner towards my family and my friends, then the consequence is that people don't trust me, and that causes their behavior to change. So consequences naturally occur when there is behavior of any sort. If a student is exhibiting negative behavior, such as, we'll just go with talking, because that is probably the most common issue in anybody's classroom, is a student talking at an inappropriate time. The natural consequence of that is that they don't get their work done, and the people around them don't get their work done. That's where we talk about previously about who is affected by your behavior. When other people are affected by your behavior, then either they get upset and they're like, will you stop that? Or the teacher says, I can't teach when you're talking. So they get repercussions from the people that are around them is one of the natural consequences for talking. A natural consequence for making a mess. So I didn't mind food and drinks being in my classroom because I often like to snack. It kind of helps me think. So I didn't mind if people did that. But It caused a problem when they made a mess. So a natural consequence to spilling their drink is that they had to get the towel and they had to clean it up. No punishment there. They made a mess, they cleaned it up. Sometimes other students would help them. Sometimes I say, like, oh, let them handle that. You need to work on this. But there are natural consequences to behavior. A punishment is not connected to the behavior. So you heard me talk about our school policies being things like lunch detention and detention and things of that nature. Those are more punishments. I'm not saying that punishments should never be used. I disagree with that. Natural consequences are more effective, but occasionally a natural consequence is not enough to deter a student's behavior, or it might not be something that is going to work in the classroom. Or in sometimes schools take away natural consequences so that there is no consequence for a behavior. Recently, many schools have taken away the natural consequence of failing and having to repeat a grade. So failing tests and failing assignments no longer have natural consequences. So as a teacher, I had to come up with different consequences or occasionally punishments. And we'll talk about that in a different podcast. Natural consequences include making things right for those who have been negatively affected by the behavior. That could be, like I said, cleaning up a mess. It could be an apology. It could be restoring somebody. So if you broke something that belonged to somebody, it could be restoring that object. Punishments don't often include making things right for those who have been affected. Sometimes they do, but most of the time not. Natural consequences are often difficult to do because you watch the child go through the natural consequences. And for some reason, this brings more pain for the person who's watching than for the person who's going through it themselves. Because we remember natural consequences. We're like, oh yeah, that was not fun. I did that when I was a kid and it was awful. But they are, like I said, they're much more effective in changing behavior because kids understand that then their behavior has a consequence. Punishments can be difficult, but most of the time they're just annoying for the students. And sometimes the students do not connect the punishment with the behavior. So they understand they have to do this punishment, but they haven't really connected it to the fact that it's because they stole little Sheila's pencil. So their behavior sometimes can be changed, but sometimes it's completely disconnected. Natural consequences and punishments, both, are most effective when they include a conversation about the behavior and how it affected the other people around them, and how it affected the student themselves. Now I'm going to give you some different behaviors and the chain of natural consequences that go with those behaviors. So some examples of how this works in a classroom. And again, this is entirely Love and Logic out of their Teaching with Love and Logic book. And I highly recommend that you take one of their courses. I'll link to their website in this podcast, but that's how I learned all of this. I went to several of Jim Fay's workshops, and I've read several of his books, and I've listened to, I think I had like 8 of their CDs, and yes, and they were CDs. That was a long time ago. I used to have a cassette tape. I did. I don't know what happened to it. I think I probably wore it out. Oh no, I loaned it to somebody that didn't return it. That happens a lot when you have Love and Logic stuff, but that's okay. So first of all, we're going to talk about the behavior. And as I said, the most common behavior in a middle school classroom especially, but probably in other classrooms as well, is talking at an inappropriate time. So the chain of natural consequences goes like this. First of all, you give them the look. Like Sheila's talking again, you know, that look with the little head shake. Every kid gets that. Because you look at them, you're like, mm-mm. Then if they stop, then it's done. You don't have to worry about it. If the behavior stops, then you've taken care of it. No problem whatsoever. If the talking continues, then you say something. Sheila, I am distracted from teaching when people talk while I'm teaching, so could you please save that conversation for after we're done with notes? If the talking continues, then I move the student across the room away from the person that they're talking to. Sheila, since you've chosen to continue causing a problem by talking, I'm going to have to move you away from your friend. Just for today, we'll try it again tomorrow. And then I move on with teaching, expecting them to go ahead and move. If they don't move, then other things have to happen. But generally, the student will move, especially if you have established yourself well as the teacher. If the behavior continues, like this is talking, if talking is an ongoing problem and the first few consequences don't do anything, then you have to get more and more severe with your consequences. And generally, when a student is having these kinds of problems, there's something else going on. That's why after I have temporarily moved their seat, if they continue, I take them out in the hall. I try to figure out what the root of the problem is. So our consequence chain again, we've already done the look. We've already said, I can't teach. We've already temporarily moved Sheila over by the windows. Now I take her into the hallway and I leave the door open so I can watch my class, but I can also have a conversation with this student that is out of their peers' audience. So in the hallway, I say, Sheila, is there something I need to know about? Something going on? You're talking an awful lot lately, and I've asked you several times really politely to stop. You know, have I done something? Or I always say that, have I done something that has upset you? Or is there something going on that's causing this? And then I listen to whatever they say. You never know what's going on in a kid's life. One time it was because something had happened. Oh, I don't remember. And they had to, like their underwear tore. And they had to throw their underwear away because they had ripped, and they were sitting there and they didn't have any underwear on and they were like really uncomfortable. And that was causing them to talk. And so I sent them to the nurse and they were able to get some clothes. Other times, you know, my mom and dad had a big argument this morning, or, oh, my boyfriend just asked me to the dance. You never know what it is that's causing the talking. But then I say, I need you to be quiet during the lesson so that everybody can hear me when I teach. Because I can't teach as effectively when there's all this talking going on. If it stops at that point, great. They go back in the room, they sit in their alternate seat for that day. I never let them go back on that day. They always get to go back the next day. In their alternate seat, if they continue, then I permanently move the student's seat. And at that point, and actually, usually when I have to pull them out into the hallway, I will also message their parent that day. A parent never wants to be blindsided by a behavior that's been happening for days and days and days, and they didn't know, or even weeks and weeks and weeks, and they didn't know. So by step 4, I send a message to the parents. Step 5, if it's on the same day, then obviously I can't message the parents. If it's on the next day and I have to move Sheila's seat again, then I say, Sheila, that's your new seat permanently now. And I pull her out into the hall and I explain and I say, I'm going to message your mom again. And I might have to talk with the counselor or the principal about this, just to let them know that I'm not in this by myself. I have a team of people with me. And my purpose is to help you to solve this problem. I always say stuff like, I want you to be able to sit by your friends. Because it's great to sit by your friends. It's not always fun to not sit by your friends and have your friends on one side of the room and you're on the other side of the room. I don't want to have to do that. But because I'm a teacher and my priority is instruction, the instruction of my students, and your talking is interfering with my job, I have to do something. And I talk with them about that. The next step, 6, is to remove the student. And you can do those school policies before that also. With the permanent seat change, and then like detentions or deductions. 3 deductions is a detention or a lunch detention or a paragraph. And then I have to remove the student from the class. So let's say it's been several days. Students continually talking, continually disruptive, continually not solving the problem themselves. So I, at step 6 point, which I might switch step 6 and 7, step 7 could actually go into many different spots depending on what your school policies are and what your team policy is. But I would have already sent a message to the administration and to the parent. And then in the hallway, I say, hey, Sheila, I cannot have you in the room if you choose to continue to talk when I need you not to. Please go to, we had an ISS room that was attended by one of the secretaries. Please go to that room and I'd have a pass for them. And I also would email the attendance secretary to make sure that they knew who was coming, to make sure the message actually got to them. So please go to room 10. I want you to come back when you can be in my room without talking at inappropriate times. And I always let them know that I want them in my room, because I do. I want them to get their education. I want them to learn their math. But I can't do my job if they're in the room and they're causing this problem. And I've had parents say, well, how is my kid supposed to pass your class if they're not in your room? And I say that is a problem. But I can't teach when they're in my room causing this problem. So when they're in the room causing the problem, nobody learns. And when they're not in the room because they caused a problem, they're not learning. So the problem lies within that child. They have to figure out how to solve that problem. Most of the time, parents will work with me because they know their child well and they know what their child's issues are and what they're good at and what they're not so good at and what they need to work on, so to speak. The next few slides are over things that I have had to deal multiple times with for students, and this is how the consequence chain worked. Because it's not a specific first, second, third, fourth. It depends on what's going on and how many times it's happened. The behavior. Farting or belching loudly, causing horrid smells in a classroom. This has happened many, many times in my teaching career, teaching middle school, especially with boys. In fact, every time it's happened, it's been a boy that has done it. Obviously, the look is going to be the first thing. Sometimes you don't know who did it. So sometimes you have to say, look, everybody, that needs to stop. So sometimes the first and the second consequence might happen at the same time. If I figure out who did it, I'm going to whisper to them, hey, that's very distracting. It smells awful. Could you please step in the hall if you must do that? Otherwise, please stop. And that's whispered in the ear. I don't want to get their audience all riled up about it, so I will speak to them privately. Happens again. Sheila, can I speak with you for a moment? Is usually how I get them in a hallway. Sheila, I cannot teach effectively when this is going on. It distracts the entire class with the giggling and with the horrid smells. Are you able to stop? With this, sometimes they can't. One time, there was a kid that his mom would stop by a convenience store every morning and buy him a burrito for breakfast. And that's what was causing the problem. And so he told me that. He's like, I can't help it. I said, okay, well, you're going to need to step into the hall when that happens. And please choose something different when you go to the convenience store for breakfast. And I did message his mom and we talked about it. And she's like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And so they started getting like a biscuit and sausage or something else. But while I'm talking to them in the hall, I do tell them, I'm going to have to message your parents about this and get their input on it. And so then they're like, whoa, you're going to tell my mom I farted in class? Yes, I am. And I'm going to be very kind and very concerned in that email. Like, I'm very concerned about Sheila. She has been having gas in class and it's causing widespread problems. And I always get immediate input from parents at that point. If it continues after that conversation and after the conversation with the parent, then I have the kid go to our timeout room or to our ISS room and they must write this class an apology, because many times these boys that do it, they know that they can produce the most noxious smell and it lingers, and they know that. So I have them write an apology, and it's the 4-part apology, which is at the end of this podcast. The next behavior is if a student is being insulting or disrespectful to other students. So this is a little bit more of a serious problem, because especially in a math class, people are oftentimes they're nervous about being in there because they're afraid of failing or they're afraid of looking bad in front of the other students. So if somebody's insulting them at the same time, then that fear escalates. And so I need to take care of that much more quicker. I do give them the look, especially if it's a sort of a low-level insult or they're kind of friendly-ish. And sometimes in middle school, they can pretend to be friends and so insult each other and say, I was only joking. And I'll give them the look, or I will go straight to the, Sheila, I don't allow students to be disrespectful towards other students, even if you're joking. And I'll say that to them low, like I will be close to them. I won't shout it across the room. No, I don't do that. I say, standing next to Sheila, I'm talking to her, I'm saying, Sheila, I don't allow students to be disrespectful towards other students in my classroom, so you're going to need to stop. So in that case, I might not even do the look. If the student continues to be insulting, then I talk to the student in the hallway and I tell them, I'm going to message your parents. Sheila, Why are you choosing to be so disrespectful towards Sam? When you're in my classroom, you must be respectful to all students, even if you don't speak to them at all. And there might have been some sort of interaction between Sheila and Sam at an earlier point in the day, and Sam stole Sheila's book or pushed her in the hallway, so that Sheila's trying to retaliate. You never know what it is that is causing the friction between those two students. Talk to Sheila about it. Say, look, you're welcome to stay in my classroom so long as you can be in here and show respect to the other students, even if it means that you don't talk to Sam at all. And I let them know that that's their choice. You are choosing to talk to Sam and insult him. You can also choose to ignore Sam completely. If the insulting continues, then I remove the student from the classroom. And again, I talk to the student's parent, and I often bring the administration in on it, especially at point 3. I often talk to the administration and my other team to see if it's happening in other classes. If it's just happening in my class and it's just happening between those two students, I will remove Sheila again. And I will say, look, you can't be in my room if you're going to insult Sam all the time. You will have to go into the other room. Oftentimes the student, when I let the parents know what's going on, I get more information about it, and then they talk to their student. It just depends on the level of insulting and disrespect. We're not talking to the level of bullying or violence yet. It's just, they gave me a dirty look, but it's a lower level kind of thing. If the student continues and you've talked to their parent and you've talked to the administration, then I have the student write a written plan to re-enter the classroom, and the plan has to be signed by the parent, the teacher, and the administration. Most of the time, in these lower level insulting things, step 4 is as far as I have to go. Occasionally, there's more to it. And so I want to get the administration involved, and sometimes they will step in and handle and do consequences, or the whole team will be involved and they say, yeah, Sheila's been insulting people in the hallway, or she's been picking on Sam in the hallway, and you end up finding it's a much bigger problem than just in your classroom. In those cases, other people are going to be involved in solving the problem. If it's just happening in your room, then that's when we continue with these consequences. Now, let's say the behavior is violent or is intimidating towards another student. That's a different ballgame altogether. I don't give them just the look. I don't ask them to resolve the problem. I skip those. I go straight to talking to them in the hallway. Someone's pounding on somebody's desk, someone's punching somebody, obviously punching somebody, but sometimes they're just shoving, or they're intimidating or threatening another student. I take them out. I want the rest of my class to know that that behavior is not tolerated in the room and that kid is going to be removed. That lets the other students know that they are safe and I've got their back. I'm not going to let them be intimidated. Safety of my other students, of all students, including the one that's being violent and intimidating. Their safety comes first. My class's safety comes first. Talk to the student in the hallway and let them know that I'm notifying the administration what you did, and I'm going to also message your parents. And then I say, what is going on? Always ask them to tell you why they're behaving this way. Sometimes there's something behind it that is very serious that you need to know. Sometimes you may find you have to hotline the kid because something happened at home that's caused them to be so angry. Or sometimes you realize that this other kid has been picking on them over and over and over again, and they've had it up to here. It's their breaking point. In those cases, you have to do different things. It depends on what their why actually is. If the student is able to say, well, like Sheila and Sam again. Sheila threatens Sam. And I talk to Sheila in the hallway and she tells me that Sam has stolen her favorite pen and he won't give it back. And she's really tired of him always doing these secret things and never getting caught. And so I say, well, if I bring Sam out here in the hallway, let's resolve this. And I bring Sam out also and I have a conversation between all three of us. If I find that Sam is this true, that this is going on, and Sam is able to give back the pen, and Sheila's like, okay, I'm fine with it now, and they both agree that this is all settled, then they will go back into the classroom. If that's not what happens, and I don't feel like the kid is able to be in the room and safely with the other kids, either safely from violence or safely from threats, because I don't believe somebody should be in a classroom and threatening other students. That's not why you're in school. So if they're going to be in there and they're going to be threatening other students, they're not going to stay in the room. So if I'm not sure, then I'm going to give them a place to go. As I said, in other schools I've had, it was a timeout room. In another school, it was an ISS room. And I will allow them to return only after the administration has met with them and dealt with the threatening behavior or the violent behavior, because that is much more serious than somebody calling somebody a name. So, like I said, the consequence change. You can skip around, you can do whatever it is, because it depends, like I said at the beginning, it depends on the special person and the special situation that the problem occurred. You have to deal with it according to the situation and the problem. So in this podcast, I was talking about my classroom rule and the consequences that I use to enforce my classroom rule. I hope that you take this and you mold it and make it into your own, because teaching your subject matter is not the only thing you teach. You also teach kids how to become better human beings. And learning how their behavior affects the other people around them is a huge part of that. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.